I never imagined that opening my front door one October afternoon would completely change how I felt about forgiveness, family, and second chances. The person standing there was the last person I expected to see, my ex-husband's son from his previous marriage. He didn't come with anger or demands. He came with kindness that I never saw coming. What happened after that moment touched my heart in ways I still can't fully explain. If you enjoy heartwarming true stories like this one, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another inspiring tale of hope and healing. It was a chilly Thursday afternoon in early October. The sky was covered with grey clouds. The kind of weather that makes you want to curl up with hot chocolate and a cozy blanket. I had just gotten back from buying groceries, feeling tired and a bit empty inside. Almost 2 years had passed since my divorce from Robert, my ex-husband. 2 long years of learning how to be myself again. Of figuring out how to live without the man who had shared my home for so long. Our marriage didn't end with big fights or screaming matches. It ended with quiet. The kind of quiet that grows slowly over many years until there's nothing left between 2 people except empty space. I thought I had accepted it all and moved on. That part of my life felt like it belonged to someone else, locked away in a room I didn't want to enter anymore. So when my doorbell rang that afternoon, I definitely wasn't expecting to see Jeremy on my doorstep. Jeremy was Robert's son from the woman he was married to before me. The last time I had seen Jeremy, he was away at college, a polite, quiet young man who seemed a bit nervous around people but was always kind. We were never super close, but we always treated each other with warmth and respect. I hadn't thought about him in years. Now here he stood, much taller than I remembered, looking more grown up with his hair cut short and neat, his hands stuffed nervously in his coat pockets. "Hello, Mrs. Langston," he said, seeming unsure if he should still call me that. I blinked in surprise. Nobody had called me by that name in such a long time. "It's just Claire now," I told him, stepping back from the doorway. "Please come inside. It's too cold to stand out there." He smiled, but it was a careful smile, like he wasn't sure how I would react to seeing him. And to be honest, I wasn't sure either. I wasn't mad at him. I was just surprised and curious, maybe a little bit protective of myself. Inside my house, the smell of cinnamon and apple filled the air from a candle I had lit earlier that morning. I watched as Jeremy looked around the room, noticing how different things looked now. "You changed how everything looks in here," he said. "I had to," I answered. "Too many sad memories with the old furniture and decorations." I realized after I said it that my words sounded heavier than I meant them to. But Jeremy didn't look uncomfortable. He just nodded slowly, like he understood exactly what I meant. Even though I didn't explain it. We both sat down in the living room. The silence between us stretched out, but it didn't feel painful or awkward. I offered to make him some tea, and he said yes. While I poured hot water over the tea bags, I started wondering why he had come to visit me. I wasn't suspicious, just genuinely curious about his reason for being there. "I hope I'm not bothering you by coming here," he finally said, holding his warm mug with both hands. "I was in the area and felt like I should stop by and see you. I've been thinking about doing this for a while now." Something about the way he spoke, so soft and honest, made me relax. "Well, I'm happy you came," I said to him. "You look like you're doing well. How is life going for you?" He laughed a little. "Better than I probably deserve most days. I'm working in something called environmental design, mostly planning and creating outdoor spaces like gardens and parks. I have my own small apartment now, trying to figure out how to be a real adult. Aren't we all trying to figure that out?" I said with a smile. For a few minutes, everything felt easy and comfortable between us. But then there was a pause, the kind that tells you something more important is coming. "I heard about what happened with Dad," he said, looking down at his tea instead of at me. There it was. I carefully set down my cup. I had a feeling that was the real reason he came. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry about how everything happened, he continued. I looked at him with surprise. You don't need to apologize to me, Jeremy. None of what happened between your dad and me was your fault. I know that, he said, his voice quieter now. But I also know that you were good to him and he didn't treat you the way you deserved to be treated. It took me a second to know what to say. I felt something tight in my chest that I hadn't expected, like touching an old wound that hadn't completely healed. Thank you for saying that, I said softly, and I really meant it. We sat quietly again, but this time the silence felt comfortable, the kind that doesn't need to be filled with words. Outside my window, the wind blew through the trees, sending bright yellow and orange leaves spinning across my lawn like tiny dancers. I kept thinking about you, he said after a little while. After the divorce happened, I didn't know if I should try to contact you or just stay away. I guess I was scared that you might be angry and slam the door in my face. I laughed gently. Well, you're lucky that I'm not the kind of person who slams doors in people's faces. His smile got a bit bigger. You were always the nice one. I remember that, even when Dad wasn't easy to be around. That's very kind of you to say, I told him. He shook his head. It's just the truth. I watched him sitting there, this grown man who still seemed to carry the weight of being his father's son. There was something so genuine in his eyes. He wasn't trying to fix anything or make excuses. He just wanted to connect with me as one human being to another. I hadn't realized until that very moment how much I had missed that feeling, being truly seen and understood by someone without any pretending. I'm really glad you decided to come here, I said again, meaning it even more than the first time. He nodded, and then almost nervously he asked, would it be okay with you if I came to visit again sometime? I waited just long enough that he started to look worried. Then I said, yes, I would really like that. When he stood up to leave, I walked with him to the front door. The air outside had gotten crisper and colder, and the sky had changed to that soft greyish-blue colour that comes right before the sun goes down. He turned to face me before stepping off my porch. Thank you for letting me inside, he said. I knew he meant more than just letting him into my house. You're welcome here any time, I replied. And I meant every word. As I watched him walk down the path toward his car, with his hands in his pockets and his shoulders hunched a little against the cold wind, I felt something stir inside me. It wasn't romantic feelings or anything complicated like that. It was just a human connection, a quiet warmth in my heart. A small spark of something good where I hadn't expected to find anything at all. In that moment, I understood that maybe not all surprises in life are bad ones. Some surprises come wrapped in kindness, and sometimes that kindness is exactly what you need to open doors in your heart that you thought were locked forever. The next morning, I found myself sitting with my coffee longer than usual, staring out my kitchen window as the sun tried to break through the grey clouds. The birds were very active that day, flying back and forth between the big oak tree in my yard and the low fence that separated my property from my neighbour Mrs. Connolly's house. It was the kind of normal morning I had experienced hundreds of times before. But somehow, something felt different today. Jeremy's visit had stirred something inside me that I couldn't quite name yet. It wasn't just about him or even about Robert. It was about the space between old memories and what comes after them, the way a familiar face can quietly shift the weight of old sadness you've been carrying. I hadn't realized until now how much I missed being part of someone's life, even in the smallest way. By the middle of the afternoon, I found myself rearranging a shelf in my living room, something I hadn't bothered to touch in months. It wasn't something I planned to do. I just noticed that the picture frames were covered in dust, and one task led to another. Before I knew it, I was standing there holding a photograph I hadn't looked at in ages. It showed me and Robert at a summer cookout party. He was laughing at something someone had said, and I was squinting into the bright sun, caught in the middle of a smile. I stared at that picture for a long time. There was no anger left inside me when I looked at it. Just a quiet acceptance of what was. That version of us in the photo had been real, even if it didn't last forever. Just as I was putting the photograph back on the shelf, there was a gentle knock at my door. For a second, I froze in place. I wasn't expecting anyone to visit. When I opened the door, Jeremy was standing there again, this time holding a paper bag. "I thought you might enjoy these," he said. "There's a bakery near the place where I'm staying. They make these amazing apple turnovers." I blinked, feeling pleasantly surprised. That's a bold move, showing up at someone's house without warning and bringing pastries. He grinned at me. I like to live dangerously. I stepped to the side and waved him inside. "Well, come on in then. You've already won me over with anything involving apples." We got comfortable in my kitchen, and the wonderful smell of cinnamon and buttery pastry filled the air as we unpacked the bag. I made us both some tea, and we sat at the small table, near the window where the afternoon light fell in soft, golden stripes across the surface. "I didn't mean to just show up without calling first," he said after taking a few bites of his turnover. "I was in the neighborhood again and remembered what you said yesterday, that I could stop by any time." "You're not showing up uninvited," I replied. "It's actually nice to have company. These walls have had way too much quiet lately." He nodded, chewing his food slowly, then looked up at me with a thoughtful look on his face. "Did you ever think about trying to get back together with him after the divorce?" I mean, it wasn't asked in an accusing way, just as a simple, gentle question. I leaned back in my chair, wrapping my hands around my warm tea mug. "There were moments," I admitted. "Usually very early in the morning when everything feels more raw and emotional. But I knew deep down that getting back together wouldn't have changed anything." He had already left me emotionally long before he actually walked out the door physically. "I'm sorry that happened," he said again, and I could see in his face that he really meant it. He was a complicated person. Yes, he definitely was, I agreed. But so am I, in my own way. We all are complicated. We sat quietly for a while after that. A kind of silence that doesn't ask anything from either person. I liked that quality about Jeremy. He didn't push me to talk or share more than I wanted to. He just showed up and was present, which oddly enough was more than Robert had done during the last year of our marriage. "I don't have very many memories of you and Dad together," Jeremy said after a while. "We didn't visit very often, but when we did come to your house, you were always so calm, like an anchor keeping a boat steady." I smiled at that description. I tried my best to be that. For a long time, I thought if I could just stay steady and calm, he would find his way back to being the version of himself that I first fell in love with. Did he ever find his way back? Jeremy asked. I looked out the window, watching a squirrel run quickly across the fence. Not really. He was already drifting away from me before we even realized what was happening. Jeremy nodded, understanding what I meant. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled something out. It was a small envelope, folded and looking a bit worn from being carried around. "I found this a few months ago," he explained. "It's a letter from him to you. I wasn't sure if I should give it to you or not, but after seeing you yesterday, I felt like maybe I should." He handed the envelope to me, his eyes full of uncertainty about whether he was doing the right thing. I took it slowly from his hands, my heart suddenly pounding hard in my chest. My name was written on the front in Robert's very recognizable handwriting. The corners of the envelope were creased and bent, and the ink had faded just a little bit. I didn't open it right away. "Do you know what the letter says?" I asked Jeremy. He shook his head. "No. I found it tucked inside a book. I only saw your name written on it. I stared at the envelope for a few more seconds, then carefully set it down on the table next to my tea mug. "I'm not ready to read it yet," I said quietly. "That's completely okay," he replied, just as quietly as I had spoken. "There's no rush to open it." I looked at him then, really studied his face carefully. He had his father's eyes, the same shape and color, but none of his guardedness or walls. There was warmth in Jeremy's eyes, something open and unafraid of being hurt. "You're a good man, Jeremy," I told him. "I don't know what your father would say if he was sitting here right now, but I know what I think and feel. I'm proud of the person you've become." He looked down at the table, clearly moved by my words. "That really means a lot coming from you." We talked some more after that, about his job designing outdoor spaces, about his small apartment and how he was decorating it, about a small coffee shop he had discovered on Main Street that made the best lattes he'd ever tasted. It felt like talking to an old friend, someone who had quietly grown into someone truly remarkable and special. When he finally stood up to leave, I walked with him to the front door again. The sky was starting to get dark, painted with streaks of rose pink and plum purple. A soft breeze stirred the leaves scattered across my porch. "I'll see you again soon?" he asked, making it sound like a question. "Any time you want," I said, really meaning it with all my heart. He gave me a small wave and walked down the path, just like he had done the day before. I stood in the doorway for a long time after he disappeared from view, still holding the unopened envelope in my hand. I hadn't read what was inside, but I knew I would eventually, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, maybe when I felt truly ready. But today, it was enough to know and understand that not all things end the way they begin. Some endings actually open the door to something quieter, something kinder, something beautifully new and unexpected. 4 whole days had passed since Jeremy gave me that envelope from Robert, and it still sat unopened on my nightstand like a sleeping thought I wasn't quite ready to wake up yet. Every single morning I would glance over at it, my fingers brushing across the edge as I reached for my reading glasses or my hand lotion. And every time I told myself the same thing: not yet. Not today. But Jeremy kept visiting me during those days. He didn't come every single day, and he never made a big deal about showing up. Sometimes he brought small gifts with him, a few colorful garden flowers he thought would brighten up my porch, a small jar of homemade peach jam he got from a roadside fruit stand, a library book he thought I would enjoy reading. Other times he came with nothing except time, and a quiet presence that felt surprisingly comforting to have around. He had a special way of making himself at home in my house without taking up too much space or making me feel crowded. I noticed he always remembered to take off his shoes at the door, always rinsed out his teacup before leaving, and never stayed so long that it felt like he was overstaying his welcome. He asked me about my days, not just to be polite, but because he genuinely wanted to know and cared about my answer. And he really listened when I talked, the kind of listening where someone actually pays attention, instead of just waiting for their turn to speak. Somewhere in the middle of all those gentle visits, I began to actually look forward to hearing the sound of his knock on my door. One afternoon when the air was heavy with the smell of rain on dry leaves, we were sitting together on my front porch. The flowers he had brought the week before had already perked up nicely in their clay pots, soaking in the soft October sunlight. I had made spiced tea for both of us, and we sat in our usual favorite spots, me in the rocking chair and him on the porch step, watching the neighborhood go about its quiet, peaceful routines. "You seem different this week," he said casually while sipping from his mug. "Different how?" I asked him. He nodded thoughtfully. "Lighter maybe, or more steady and calm. Something's changed." I thought about what he said for a moment. I suppose I do feel a little more settled inside. Maybe I'm finally letting go of things I've been carrying for way too long. Jeremy looked down into his tea mug. I think all of us carry more weight than we realize. Sometimes it takes another person coming into our lives to help us see that we're carrying too much. I studied his face for a moment. There was something in his voice, something thoughtful and a little uncertain or worried. What about you? I asked him directly. You've been doing a lot of showing up here lately. Are you carrying something heavy too? He hesitated, looking like he wasn't sure if he should answer. Then he nodded slowly. I think I missed having someone to talk to who remembers the parts of my dad that I didn't get to know when I was growing up. He looked directly at me. You knew him in ways I never did. Not just as a father figure, but as the actual man behind all the walls he put up. I chuckled softly at that description. Oh, there was a whole maze of walls and curtains to get through with your father. Jeremy smiled, but it was a sad kind of smile. I keep trying to make peace with who he actually was, and with all the things he wasn't. That's a very hard truth to accept, I said gently. He had his good moments, but he wasn't easy to love, and he didn't always know how to love people back the right way. Jeremy looked out toward the trees in my yard. The wind had picked up a bit, scattering a few golden leaves across the grass like nature's confetti. I spent so many years of my childhood trying to impress him, he admitted, his voice thick with old emotion. I got good grades, had polite manners, played sports that he didn't even bother watching. I kept thinking that maybe one day he would look at me and actually say out loud that he was proud of me. I reached over and gently touched his arm. It was the first time I had made that kind of physical contact with him. Just a simple, quiet gesture of comfort. He didn't pull away from my touch. I think he was proud of you, I said carefully. He just didn't know how to put those feelings into words. Jeremy looked at me then, his eyes damp with unshed tears but still steady and strong. I didn't come back here just to drop off baked goods and play visitor, he said honestly. I think I've been trying to find something that I didn't even know I had lost. I nodded, my heart feeling heavy with understanding. A sense of home and belonging, I said, finishing his thought. Yeah, he whispered, confirming what I had guessed. We sat together in silence after that conversation. The kind of silence that doesn't come from awkwardness, but from two people sitting inside the same deep realization together. I hadn't known until that moment how much I needed this connection too. This slow, surprising bond that was forming between us felt real and meaningful. It wasn't forced or fake. It wasn't complicated or confusing. It was just genuinely kind and honest and real. When he stood up to leave that afternoon, I surprised myself by suddenly saying, "Wait here for a minute." I went inside my house, picked up that envelope from Robert that had been sitting on my nightstand, and came back outside with it in my hand. My fingers shook just a little bit as I sat back down in my rocking chair. I think I'm finally ready to read this, I told Jeremy. He watched quietly and respectfully as I carefully opened the flap of the envelope, slid out the folded paper from inside, and unfolded it with slightly trembling hands. It was a short letter, just a few paragraphs written in Robert's careful and precise handwriting, as if he had thought very hard about every single word before writing it down. I read the letter silently to myself, feeling my heart grow tight in my chest as I took in his words. Claire, if you're reading this letter, it means I didn't have the courage to give it to you face to face. That's pretty typical of me, isn't it? I've never been good at facing the things I've broken or the people I've hurt. You deserved so much better than what I gave you. I knew that even as I was walking away from our marriage. I just didn't know how to be the man you needed me to be. And instead of trying harder to become that man, I made my failures your problem to deal with. I regret that more than anything else I've ever done. There was a time when I loved you with everything I had inside me. I really hope you can believe that and know it's true. I hope that someday you find someone new who reminds you every single day that you are worth showing up for, worth fighting for, worth loving properly. I couldn't be that man for you. And that's my failure. Not yours. But I want so much better for you in the future. Thank you for loving me during a time when I didn't even know how to be loved properly. Ah. I sat there quietly for quite a while after finishing the letter, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. Jeremy didn't say a single word. He didn't have to say anything. His presence was enough. Eventually, I folded the letter carefully and placed it gently on my lap. My eyes were wet with tears, but I didn't feel broken inside. Instead, I felt released, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I think that's the closest thing to a real apology I'll ever get from him, I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. Jeremy nodded with understanding. And you deserved every single word of what he wrote. I looked at him carefully, really looked at his face and into his eyes. There was something so gentle in the way he was looking back at me. Not pity, not obligation or duty, just a steady, quiet presence of someone who genuinely cared. You've brought more healing into this house in just 2 weeks than I managed to find in 2 whole years, I told him honestly. I didn't plan for any of this to happen, he replied. But I'm really glad it did. As the afternoon light faded away and the air grew cooler around us, we sat together a little longer, just listening to the wind rustling through the leaves and the occasional sound of a car driving past on the street. There were no big dramatic revelations, no floods of tears. Just 2 people, one mourning old losses, one searching for connection, finding comfort in the same quiet corner of the world. And for the first time in a very long while, I felt not just like a woman who had been left behind and abandoned, but like a woman who was learning slowly and surely how to let someone into her life again. Not to replace anything or anyone from the past, but to begin something completely new and different, and beautiful in its own special way. The following week brought with it a sense of stillness and peace that I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the heavy kind of stillness like right after Robert left me. This was a peaceful kind, like something inside my soul had finally settled after drifting around lost for way too long. The letter from Robert stayed in the drawer beside my bed now. Not because I needed to keep reading it over and over, but because I no longer feared what emotions it might stir up inside me. I had read it one more time during that week, taking in every word slowly. Then I folded it carefully and put it away, not out of grief or sadness, but from something much closer to true closure and peace. It had taken so much time to get here. But I could finally see Robert for who he had really been, flawed and distant and imperfect, yet still human, and not feel that old familiar pang of resentment or anger toward him. Being able to do that was its own kind of freedom. And I felt lighter than I had in years. Jeremy stopped by again on Saturday afternoon, this time without bringing a bag of treats or having any particular reason for visiting. He just knocked on my door with his hands in his pockets and gave me that now familiar, warm smile that always made me feel glad to see him. I figured I'd check if your porch swing was available for sitting, he said with a grin. It's always available for you, I replied, opening the door wider. The air outside had taken on the full scent of autumn in its prime wood smoke from fireplaces, damp leaves on the ground, something crisp and sweet that seemed to cling to the wind itself. We sat together with steaming mugs of warm apple cider, and for quite a while neither of us said very much at all. That comfortable silence had become part of our natural rhythm together. Quiet moments weren't gaps that needed filling anymore. They had become their own special kind of language that we both understood.